In this video, I'm going to demonstrate all of the steps involved in working the V-neck trim in my Audrey's pullover pattern. And although I'll be walking you through all of the steps involved in this specific pattern, the techniques that I'm going to work are probably similar to other V-neck sweaters as well. So even if you're not working on this particular pattern, you might find a lot of the things I'll be demonstrating to be helpful. So to start, we need to pick up stitches around our V-neck. So I have my Audrey's pullover here. Here is our neckline. And in the pattern, it starts with picking up and knitting at our back neck. So I'm going to flip the sweater over so the right side of the back is facing me. And the other thing you're going to need is a 16-inch circular in a needle size smaller than you had used when working the body of your garment. So I had used a US 7, and so I have a US 6 16-inch here. And I have my yarn ready to go right here. Okay, so to start with the back neck, we're going to want to start. So here is our neck right here. So we're going to be picking up and knitting into our cast-on stitches. So first, let me show you what those cast-on stitches look like. So they look like V's, so like the letter V going sideways. So if you see right here, there's a V, there's a V, there's a V, and we're going to be going into both legs of each V. Now, there's lots of different ways that people go about doing a pickup in a cast-on edge. This is just the particular way that I like to do it. But to start, we're going to start at our first V at our back neck. So look for the raglan line here, and I'm going to pick up into this V right here, and I'm going to go into both legs. So I'm going to go into this leg and then go into the back leg as well, just like that. Then I'm going to take my yarn, and I like to leave a nice long tail in case I need to cinch up anything afterwards. I'm going to drape it over the top of my needle here. And then I'm just going to knit. So I'm going to take this needle and sort of grab the top of that of the yarn and bring it through, just like that. So I've picked up and knit my first back neck stitch cast on. And then I'll go into the next V. And I like to, as you can see, I'm sort of holding the fabric with my left hand like this, just to help sort of align the V cast on stitches I'll be picking up into. So I'm just going to go into the next one. So this would be the next one right here. Then I'll wrap the yarn around the needle and knit. And then I'll go into the next one, just like that, and knit it. And so the pattern provides a specified number you're supposed to pick up. And for some sizes, it's all of the back neck cast on. But for some sizes, you're supposed to skip 2 stitches. And the size that I'm working on, I have to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be picking up all of these V's, but probably when I get to around here, I'm going to skip one. And then right here, I'll probably skip one. So it doesn't have to be an exact science here, but just sort of, evenly skip over. And I'll show you that. So I'm going to go ahead and continue going into each of these V's one at a time here. So insert, knit it. So I'm going to skip a stitch right now because, again, for my size, it had said that I need to do that. So instead of going into this next V right here, I'm just going to skip over it and go into the one right next to it. So I am about around the same place I had skipped one over there approximately. So I'm just going to skip one more. So instead of going into this one, I'm going to go into this V right here. So I'm just going to count and see how many I have left to pick up. So I'm at 32, and for my size, I needed to pick up 34. So I just have 2 more. All right, so I have picked up all of my back neck stitches. Then in step 2, it says we're going to be picking up at our top left shoulder. And so those are the stitches along here at the top of our sleeve here. And we're going to pick them up in the same manner as we had done the back, because these are also cast on stitches. But what I like to do before we get started, and you'll see I'm going to do this throughout the process, is I'm going to take a removable marker and put it on my needle here. And that way it just helps for counting the stitches in each section that you're going to be working on. So now I'm going to just pick up into each of the V's here along the top of my left shoulder. Again, remember, left and right are from the perspective of wearing the garment. Okay, just have one more to do, because for my size it said to pick up and knit 12 stitches. Okay, so I have made it to the end there. And one thing I wanted to point out, so when I picked up and knit my last stitch, I sort of noticed that there just appears to be a little bit more of a gap right there. And what I always advise with picking up and knitting is that sometimes you need to tweak things a little bit just to make things look nice. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this stitch off. And I can see there by going into that V, there's already sort of a little bit of a gap here. So what I'm going to do, instead of going into the V like I've been doing into the cast on, I'm actually just I'm going to grab this loop down here and then just go into the first leg of the cast on, just like that. And I'm going to knit that instead. And as you can see, then I don't have any hole right there. So that's just a little trick that sometimes I work when I encounter little gaps like that. Okay, so I'm going to now remove the marker here because we finished that particular section, and I'm going to place it here because now we're ready to move on to step 3. And in step 3, instead of picking up into a cast on edge, we're going to be picking up along a vertical edge. And so the process is just a little bit different. Because when you're picking up into a vertical edge like this, you often need to pick up at a ratio of something like 3 stitches for every 4 rows. That's one of the most common ratios, and that's what it is in this pattern as well. And also in this pattern, it also gives a specific stitch count that you should have when you get to the bottom here. So in general, we're going to be picking up 3 stitches for every 4 rows, but it's also important that we have a particular stitch count. So we'll see as we sort of make our way down, we might need to stray from that ratio in order to get the right stitch count. And that is totally okay if you have to do that. So let me show you how I like to pick up along a vertical edge like this. And there's lots of different ways out there for picking up and knitting in this sort of area. So the way I'm showing you is just my preferred method for doing it. But what I like to do is I don't like going into the very edge here. I like to go into the column of V's that's next to the edge. And so if we turn this up here, see how when I line this up with my left hand here, you can really see the V's nicely. So you see this whole column of V's like that. And so those are the stitches that I'm going to want to go into. So I like to just sort of hold it like this with my left hand to help guide where I'm going a little bit. Okay, so to start up here, it's always a little tricky, I find, up in this area here. It will get easier as we make our way down, but I'm going to go into this stitch right here. And then I'm going to find my other V's making our way down. So here is the next one. And then here is the one right underneath it. So that is our 3 stitches. And now it says 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So that means we're going to skip the next V. So I would be going into this V, but because I want to skip it, I'm going to go over into this V. So as you can see, I'm going into both legs of the V. And then I'm going to go into this one and then into this one. Again, my left hand is really helping to sort of line things up. So, because I've kind of like pinched it between my thumb and my index finger. Okay, so I've just done 3 in a row. So then I'm gonna skip the next one. So we're gonna skip that one and go down into this one. And we'll do 3 in a row again. So that V, then that V, and then that V. And then I'll skip the next one. So we won't go into this one. We'll go into this one. Skip this one and go into this one and do 3 in a row. Skip that one. Okay, so I feel like we're kind of at the halfway part. So let me show you what I like to do. I like to count where I'm at. And so again, this is why it was nice to place that marker before this section. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. And for my size, it said to pick up and knit 34 stitches. So what I like to do at this point, it's sort of the halfway, is I just start counting without actually picking up and knitting and seeing that if I continued at this 3 stitches for every 4 rows going down here, will I get to the right stitch count, or will I need to adjust that ratio at any point? So I know I'm at 18 and I know I'm at the point where I'm supposed to skip one. And at this point, it might be helpful. I always have like a little DPN hanging around that I use as a little pointer. And sometimes that can be helpful. So I know I have 18 here. I'm going to skip this one. So then I would do 19, 20, 21. Then this would be a skip. 22, 23, 24. That would be a skip. 25, 26, 27. Then I would skip this one. 28, 29, 30. Let me move this over here. And then I would skip this one. 31, 32, 33. So it looks like it probably would be best. I'm like 1 stitch short. So I'm just going to make sure that when I'm picking up and knitting over here, that I don't skip one of those stitches. So that's why it's helpful to sort of assess the situation at this point, and that helps you to know whether or not you need to stray from that ratio of 3 for every 4 rows in order to get the right stitch count. So I'm just going to continue in the same manner that I have been working, making sure to utilize my left hand to really line up that column of V's that I want to go into. So I'm at the point where I've counted, I have 30 stitches, I have 4 more to pick up, and I counted. And so I'm not going to skip this next stitch like I typically would if I was keeping with my ratio, just to make sure that I have the right amount of stitches. And if you ever need to undo, it's also very easy. So if I want to undo that stitch, you would just take it off. So if you had miscounted and you need to go back, you could just do that and easily undo it. All right, so that should be the correct number going down, but I'm going to do one more count just to make sure. All right, so I have the correct number. So now we've finished step 3. So in step 4, we're now ready to pick up and knit our center stitch. So let me show you what I like to do. First, I like to mark where the actual center stitch is. I'm going to take another removable marker, and this is what I like to do. So to identify the stitch, the center stitch, usually I look for the elongated stitch. You'll likely have an elongated strand right there. And the center stitch is going to be right below that and a little bit to the right. So here is one of the legs, And then the other leg is just right next to it, right here, just like that. So at least now with both of those legs being on my locking marker here, I just know now where my needle needs to go into. And so then what I will do is take my needle and again, just go into both of those legs that I had marked just like that. And then I just take the marker off. We'll put it there just for a second. And then I knit those two legs together. Just like that. Okay, so now we've knit our center stitch. So then in step 5, it says to attach a locking stitch marker right to the outside of the fabric, right under this stitch. So I'm gonna take my locking marker and just put it right underneath it. So here is a stitch that is right underneath my center stitch. And then I will close it up so it stays intact. So now we're ready to move on to step 6. And so before I do that, I'm going to take that marker that was up here for counting purposes, and I'm just going to put it over here just so that it makes it easier for counting. And then we're going to pick up and knit the same number we had done on the left front. We're going to pick up at the same ratio and the same amount going up this side. So let me show you how we would get started with that. So again, I like to use my left hand to sort of guide. Okay, so here are the column of V's that I want to go into. I don't want to go into that very edge. I'm going to go into the column right next to the edge. And I'm going to go into this one to start. And sometimes I do find going into that first stitch, sometimes the marker that I place for counting is just in the way. So one thing you could do is you can actually take that off to start. Go ahead and pick up your first stitch. Oops, that split a little bit. That can happen. You just need to move it a little bit. There we go. So you can make sure to get into both legs. Okay, so then after I've knit that first stitch, then I can attach the counting marker right here. And that way it just wasn't in the way for when we were picking up our first stitch. Okay, so now again, I'm gonna do 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So I'll go into the next V, then into the next one. And often I'll just take a quick look down here to make sure everything looks okay. If you saw any big gaps, at this point, you could just undo and just try again. That's the great thing with picking up and knitting. It's an easy thing to just undo what you've done. And sometimes it just takes a little trial and error as well. Okay, so we have our 3. So then I'm going to skip 1 and then go into the next one and then do 3 in a row. So it's the exact same process as we had worked along the left front. And similarly, what I'll do is once I'm about halfway, I'm going to count and see if I likely will have to change my ratio just a little bit because I know that I had to do so on the other side. Okay, so I've made it to the top of my right front. I just had one more stitch to pick up and knit. All right, so then I would do a double check just to make sure that I have picked up the correct number again. 2, 3, 3, 4. All right, so I have the right number. So I'm going to take, again, my counting marker, making sure not to confuse it with the marker you had placed to mark your front center, but my marker I'm using for counting, and I'm going to put it on the right needle. And so then in step 7, we are just picking up and knitting our right shoulder stitches. So the same as we had done on the left. And so to start, I'm just going to go into this V right here. Then go into each of the V's at the top, and it should match the number listed in the pattern for your particular size. So I just have one more to pick up, and similar to when we worked the other side. So if I go and pick up into this last V, this last cast on, I can already see there's a big hole right here. So instead, I'm gonna pick up this loop and just this leg of the stitch. And sometimes you just need to torque the fabric a little bit in order to get in there, just like that. And so that way I don't have a big gap that's right there. All right, so then I will remove my locking marker here. So we have now picked up all of our stitches. And so then the very last step was to place a marker for beginning of round on the right needle. You could use your locking marker. I'm going to use a smaller marker. So that will be my beginning of round. And then it just says to join for working in the round. And that just means to make sure you sort of align everything so that you're ready on the next row to start working in the round. And so now that all my stitches are picked up, it's time to work the rib trim. So in round one of the rib trim, it says that we're going to knit 2, purl 2 to the mark center. And because the knit 2, purl 2 is in a bracket, that means it's a repeated sequence. So you're just going to do knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2 until we get to that marked center of the V-neck. So let me show you what that looks like. To start, I'm going to knit, and that first stitch is going to feel real loose because that was where we had originally joined our yarn. So don't worry about that. So I'm going to do knit 2. You can always cinch up your tail if you would like. So there's my knit 2, and then I'll do purl 2. And so then I'm just going to repeat that over and over again till we get to the marked center. Okay, so I'm getting closer to my marked center here. And so here again is my marked center. This is you can always see where the marker is. And so you know that is right above it. That's the marked center stitch. So it looks like I am 4 stitches before that. So it had said to knit 2, purl 2 to that marked center. So I just have one more repeat sequence of knit 2, purl 2 to do. Okay, so then once I get to my marked center, it then says to knit 1. And then it says to purl 2. And then it just says to knit 2, purl 2 all the way back to the beginning of round marker. Okay, so I just have one more set of purl 2. All right, so I am at my beginning of round marker. So round 1 is complete. So in round 2, we're going to be working our first decrease round. And so it starts by saying to knit 2, purl 2 to 4 stitches before the marked center. So I will just continue to knit 2, purl 2, but this time we're just going to make sure to not go all the way to the center stitch, but to 4 stitches before that marked center. Okay, so I'm getting closer to my marked center. So here's my marked center. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I just have 2 more purl stitches to work, and then I will be 4 stitches. So this is what 4 stitches before the marked center looks. So here's the marked center stitch, and you just sort of follow it up. Okay, so that's the marked center. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so then it says to knit 2 and then purl 1. So I'll knit 2, then I'll purl 1. And then it says to CDD, and that stands for center double decrease. And let me show you how that has worked. The first part is that you're going to slip the next 2 stitches knitwise together as if to knit 2 together. And keeping the yarn in the back as you do that. So I'm going to insert it into these 2 stitches as if I'm going to knit them together, just like that. And then I'm just going to, slip them over to the right needle without working them. Then I'm going to knit 1. And then I'm going to take my left needle tip and I'm going to insert it into those 2 stitches I had slipped. So these 2 stitches right here on the right needle, and I'm going to lift them up and over that last stitch that I just knit. So the last stitch on the right needle. So lift it up and over and then off of the right needle, just like that. So that's a CDD, a center double decrease. Then it says to purl 1. And then it says to knit 2, purl 2 to the end. All right, so I'm just reaching the end of round 2. So round 2 is now complete. And so now if we look ahead to rounds 3 through 10, they're all pretty similar to what we just worked. However, the difference being that in rows 3, 4, and 5, you're just working a different amount of stitches. You're working that knit 2, purl 2 over and over again to a certain number of stitches before that marked center. So for example, in round 3, it says to work knit 2, purl 2 until 3 stitches before the marked center. Whereas in the row we just worked, round 2, we had worked to 4 stitches. And then in round 4, again, it's similar. You're going to knit 2, purl 2, but on round 4, you're going to be repeating that sequence until 2 stitches before the marked center. And so then once you've worked rounds 2 through 5, you'll see that the remaining rounds 6 through 10, are just repeating those particular rounds. And as designed, I had liked the width of 10 rounds. However, if let's say you wanted to close up your V-neck a little bit more, if depending on the size that you made and maybe your row gauge, if maybe it was a little bit deeper than you had preferred, you could always just keep repeating those decrease rounds 2 through 5 over and over again until you get to the thickness that you prefer. But I'm going to go ahead now and work the pattern as written. So I'm going to now move on to round 3. So I'll work rounds 3 through 10. And then I'm going to show you how I like to bind off in pattern. So I have finished around 10. And so now I'm ready to bind off in pattern. So I want to show you how I like to do that. And in the pattern for Audrey's pullover, I suggest binding off with a needle size larger. So because I had used a US 6 to pick up my stitches, I have a size 7 needle. And that was just my experience with this. I wanted to make sure that the V-neck didn't feel too tight at all. And so binding off with a needle size larger really helps to prevent that from happening. But if you do find that you typically bind off really loosely, you might not want to go up to a needle size. But most people tend to bind off a little tighter than looser. So it's worth giving this a try. So I have my work here. I had just finished that round 10. In my right hand here is the larger needle. So you can see this is the larger needle. And I'm going to go ahead and remove my beginning of round marker. And so when you bind off in pattern, we basically just want to work each stitch as it presents itself. So for example, these 2 stitches are knit stitches, these 2 are purl. So I'm going to be knitting and purling each of those as I'm working it. The other thing I like to do, I like to kind of move the stitches down a little bit here. Okay, so I'm going to go into my first stitch. And again, I'm working with this needle is my larger one. And in order to do the first bind off, you have to work 2 stitches. So I'm just going to knit 2. It's always a little cumbersome in the beginning here where you have your other needle tip. So don't worry about that right here. Okay, so I've done my, I've knit 2 stitches. So now I can work my first bind off. So I'll take this needle tip, insert it into this stitch and lift it up and over and off of the needle. Now this next stitch is a purl stitch, I could tell because it has that purl bump. So I'm going to bring the yarn to the front and I'm going to purl it. And then I'm going to work the bind off. So I'll insert this needle into this stitch and lift it up and over and off. And then the next stitch is also a purl stitch. I can tell by the purl bump. So I'm going to purl it and then work the bind off. All right. And so then I'm just going to continue in that manner. So if it's a knit stitch, I'm going to knit it and then do the bind off. So here it's a knit stitch, then I do the bind off. And if it's a purl stitch, like these next two stitches, first I'm going to purl it and then I do the bind off. And so I'm just going to continue in this manner until I get down to the center stitch, and I'll show you how I will treat that stitch. Okay, so I'm getting close to my marked center. It looks like I just have 3 stitches before that marked center. So this stitch is a knit stitch. So I knit it and then I do the bind off. Same with this one. And then this stitch is a purl stitch. I see the purl bump, so I'll purl it and then do the bind off. But then my center stitch that's where we had always worked that center double decrease, but it looks like a knit stitch, right? So I'm going to bring the yarn to the back of the work and I'm going to knit it and then do the bind off. And then the stitch right next to it has that purl bump, so I'll bring the yarn to the front and purl it and then do the bind off. And then the rest of the stitches are in that knit 2, purl 2. So again, I'll just be knitting the knit ones and purling the purl ones. We could just take a quick look. And so by binding off this way, it really keeps everything nicely in the same stitch pattern that we had been working the trim. So I'm just going to continue in this manner till I get to the end, and then we'll take a look. Okay, I'm almost at the end here. Just have 2 more stitches to purl and bind off. All right, last stitch to bind off. And then what I like to do is in that last stitch, I just sort of elongate it a little bit, take my needles out. So I have both of my needles. I'm just going to put them both aside. And then I'm going to cut my yarn. I always like to leave a nice long tail for weaving in. And then I will just take my tail and put it through that last stitch just like this. And then when I'm cinching up, I go like this. And then as I get closer, I just sort of move that knot down just a little bit. All right, so let's take a look here. All right, it looks really great. I'm super happy with how all of this looks, and it's a great depth. And again, as I mentioned, if based on perhaps if your row gauge was a little off or something like that, and if your V neck wound up a lot deeper and you want to close up your neckline, and you look at it at this point and you say, oh, I wish it was a little bit higher up, you could always undo your bind off and then just continue the rib trim as written with those center double decreases until you're happy with the depth. So it's very easy to adjust if you would like to do so. So I hope it's been helpful, me guiding you through the entire process for working the neck rib trim of Audrey's pullover. Happy knitting.